Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Shield, and this is
Benjamin Shield.
and this is Getting Inside the Right Male Mind. We are so happy to be here. It's been a while, and we're happy to be back. We are actually having our team meeting for our business, our first live in-person team meeting, something that we've never done before. So it's exciting. We have four amazing women here. They are the women that bring our Emotionally Naked Dating course to life. They help us stay on top of every aspect of the business, and it's been just the most incredible weekend, right, Dave? It's just been extraordinary. We've never met in person, so we've always been brainstorming over Zoom, and it's just been a magical experience.
Right. And it hasn't been just a business. This is a family.
Yeah.
And having everyone together has been so meaningful. So good people and good food.
Yeah, good. Well, yeah, thanks to you. We have been eating very well, but it's a real gift to have a team. When I first started coaching, I thought I wanted a coaching practice, but I never knew what it would be like to actually have a real business where I needed, a team of, there's really six of us in total, including you and me. So I never knew what it would be like to be leading a team and co-creating a vision for a business together. It's just absolutely been magical. So what I love more than anything is their passion and devotion to the work we're doing. And how I guess on Friday when we all met for the first time, how emotional everyone was about our mission and what their former jobs were like and what it's like working in this business and helping women transform their lives. Two of the women were school teachers, and one was formerly a nurse, and the other worked in IT, in sales. And all four of them were in tears because they felt so fortunate to be part of a mission that's literally changing women's lives. So it's really been an incredible experience. Well, on that note, today, the name of our business, the name of the course, the 12-week course I teach is called Emotionally Naked Dating. And something that's been coming up with our women in the program is this idea of, what's the difference between being emotional and being emotionally naked? So I'm going to let you take that from here, baby. And why don't you start us off?
Well, emotional vulnerability is crucial in building these deep connections with another person. And that's why we really stress it. But emotional availability has to be done with trust and safety, and also a foundation to build on, so that someone doesn't become overwhelmed with someone else's emotions and really not knowing what to do with it. When we reveal ourselves to another person, the idea is to become closer to that person. And it includes talking about present things, but also things that are deeply cared about, and things about our past. Emotional vulnerability invites mutual sharing. It invites both people to reveal those parts of themselves layer by layer in a safe way. And when we become emotionally vulnerable, we share something and we wait to see how it's responded to and how it's received. And if it just falls on dead ears. Well, there's not that trust and safety to really share. But the goal is, as we share something, it opens up the other person's heart. And then they share something emotionally vulnerable back, and it begins to build, and a relationship builds. And so often people will jump into the to romantic intimacy long before they share emotional vulnerability. As we often say, share your head before you share your bed. Because if you share your bed first, it's very hard to go back and build that foundation of friendship, emotionally vulnerable conversations, and all, because there's role playing, there's expectation, or there's just realizing that you become lovers and there's nothing underneath it to support that level of intimacy.
Well, let's talk about, like, women. Some women can be highly emotional and erratic, and sometimes women think, as women, especially young women who are having hormonal severe, well, even women in menopause, you can't even really say that, but women do go through a lot of hormonal changes that create a lot of just emotional outbursts. And sometimes we're not even aware of what's going on with us, unless a woman really is tracking her cycle. We go through these extraordinary shifts that I don't think men could possibly begin to understand. And all of this is happening internally with us. We feel cranky, we feel moody, we feel achy, and that creates so much just emotional upset. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're being emotional with men. I'm sure you've had that in relationships.
Absolutely. And men often feel, boy, am I going to get rewarded for this? And there's absolutely no memory, no recall of any of the discussions. Or I think the best we could do, the very best, is if we know that if someone knows that they're going through an emotional time or a menstrual cycle, is to just share that very gently and just say, look, I'm not myself, today or for these next few days. Bear with me. And if I say something that might, offend you or be too much, please understand. And that's emotional vulnerability. Anything that invites mutual sharing, and then someone could say, if they're able to, have you ever experienced anything like that, where you just feel just completely overwhelmed and at the effect of emotions rather than witnessing?
Well, do men feel that? Like, do men go through highly emotional periods, or is it mostly like if you get, if another guy gets in your space, or did you go through just emotional times?
Well, men in general can feel fear about work, fear about competition, fear about their masculinity. So many things. It's just not in our nature to share as freely as it is for a woman to.
So you internalize, men internalize it, and they just go inside. For the most part, they don't act out in the same way that some women do.
And that's why men need women, because a man isn't going to share these things with another man. When we go out, when a guy goes out with another guy, they'll often sit at a bar side by side and watch a football game, or sit on the couch and watch a football game, or do some activity, tennis, something like that. Men need women to share
emotionally,
because often that connection with a good woman is the only way that they could share these important issues in their lives that they have to hold in otherwise, if they're not in a relationship or even on a significant date.
Mhm. It's interesting. I think women sometimes feel very, it's hard for us because know that we can be erratic, that we can be emotional, and sometimes a guy will say, "Oh, is it that time of the month?" Or you'll know,
Right.
you'll see it more in us than we see it in ourselves. And you'll make a statement like that. And I think for us, there's so much volatility with our emotions that we, in a lot of ways, don't have control over that. That's like the hardest thing. And so, like I said earlier, we don't even know that this is going on half the time. I mean, unless a woman really is tracking her cycles and she knows, oh, I'm starting to get, premenopausal, I'm starting premenstrual, and I'm going, I can feel I'm not myself, I'm tired, I'm cranky. But a lot of times women just don't even know that this is happening, and they're just erratic. And it's very, very hard. I'm sure, I'm just saying, it is so hard for us because we're sort of at the mercy of this. And it's very difficult to separate emotional vulnerability from being emotional.
Yes.
And I really think a lot of times we just wish men really understood what we go through, Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And I don't know if it's possible for a man to truly fully understand. I mean, we can witness, we can sympathize, but we don't feel the same things.
Yeah.
And so it's sometimes unimaginable for a man to fully feel what the woman is going through, and even other than just understand the circumstances, beyond that, and give space and understanding and empathy.
But there's no frame of reference really for men.
Yeah. And beyond the normal hormonal cycles, there are people, both men and women, but that can be, instead of emotionally vulnerable, just emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And when, emotional vulnerability invites mutual sharing, not just by just being emotional. It can cause the other person to just become like a listener, to even mentally retreat. They can even become defensive.
But can you give an example, babe? I think it would be really good for people to have a concrete example of what it would sound like to be emotional and what it would sound like to be emotionally naked.
Well, I once went on a blind date. My mother had a friend and who had a grandchild, a granddaughter, and we went out to dinner. And from the first moment that I picked her up at her apartment, she was talking about her job, her brother, her father, just all of this, and the drive over to this really nice restaurant, and the entire meal. I was just listening, and it was just negative. And we didn't have any foundation, for this discussion. It wasn't that I knew her brother or, I knew the context of her work. And my sense is that she would be talking this way to anyone. And I was just a listener. And it got so intolerable. And because she was just talking and talking, about her own emotions, besides just driving me out of the conversation, it became intolerable. And she wasn't eating her food, she was just talking. So I was finishing my entree, she was still on her salad. And I did probably the rudest thing I've ever done on a date. I signaled the waiter, and I just pointed to her salad and her entree sitting there and said, "Would you like that to go?" Because I couldn't take another moment. It was just,
And how would she have handled that differently? Like, what would have been a better way? Let's say that she was having some bad things going on in her life, or some things, and those things were on her mind, and she wanted to share authentically. Like, what would she have done differently that would have been emotionally naked instead of just being emotional?
Well, she would have said, "Boy, I've had a tough day. How was your day?" And then she would say, and often the guy would say, "Well, what made it so difficult?" "Well, I've had these issues with my boss, and they've been this and this and this. Has anything like that happened with you? Because it's really tough to go through." And it's mutually sharing. And hopefully the conversation begins to elevate more and more, and the two people become closer and closer. In the example I gave, where I asked if you would like that to go, we were so separate, and I couldn't wait to get out of that date, as opposed to, wow, this is someone who is really curious about me, has a real interest in my day and my life. So words can bring us together, or they could take us apart.
Yeah, I remember, excuse me, I remember when I was dating someone before you, and not after you. Duh. And I was
That's
so
very emotionally vulnerable.
Thank you. I was so desperate. The emotion that I was conveying was desperation and control. And I don't remember what the conversation was about, but the desperation in trying to get him to understand me, and the way I was speaking literally was pushing him out the door. He was literally walking backwards towards the door, and he said, "Leave me alone. I can't talk about this anymore." And as you said, it was literally driving us apart. It was driving him out the door. It was one of the low points in my dating life. And I remember how horrible it felt, but it wasn't, there was no productive conversation. There was desperation. And no matter what words I was using, the emotion was literally pushing him away. So it would have been a whole different thing. And of course, I didn't know how to do this at the time. Nobody taught me how to be vulnerable, or how to have a beautiful, emotionally naked conversation. This is something after that low point, I started to really look at how I was being, and my desperation and my desire to control in relationships. And I started to look at how I talked and how I was communicating with men. And that became the beginning, of course, of me becoming the woman I am today.
Right.
But, this is an art. It is not an easy thing to, first, I think women, we all have to step back and ask ourselves in any given moment, am I being emotional? Am I just dumping, right? Is this just a dump? Am I taking, and it's okay. Like, here's one thing I want to say. We all get emotional. We all are overwhelmed with emotion. It's okay to go to your partner and say, look, I'm just having a terrible time right now. And I just need you to listen, and just to say, is it okay? And to be able to emote there's emoting isn't bad. I don't want women to hear this and feel, like their hands are tied or they can't go to a partner or a loved one and cry and be heartfelt. But it's the dumping on another person and using another person as an emotional dumping ground.
Yes. And when there's emotional dumping, it's usually repetitive. So, what you're talking about, healthy emotions, and saying, look, could you just listen? Well, that's usually a 1 or 2 or 3 time thing, and hopefully at different levels each time. But emotional dumping is when you can just picture someone on a date and they're really dumping the same thing again and again and again while they're on the reason why they're on serial dating. Yeah. And with emotional dumping, with being constantly emotional, and we'll use the term emotional dumping. When there's emotional vulnerability, both people feel better at the end of the date. With emotional dumping, people feel worse. They feel overwhelmed, exhausted from the emotional dumping. Both parties, both the person who's speaking and the person who's listening. And they walk away, feeling heavier, annoyed, tired, and certainly not wanting to have another date with that person.
Yeah.
So, these one-sided conversations, even if they're emotional, don't create connection. It's the emotional vulnerability that's an invitation for the other person to respond, and also to see how the other person responds. And if it just falls on deaf ears, or if they start they start emotionally dumping themselves, well, there may not be a connection there. Or someone may need to be taught, just say, how I really like to be listened to, or it would make me so happy if you could respond and share something about what I just said, something on that order.
Well, a lot of times, can I just say, when people dump, they're not looking, it's not as if there's any room for connection. They're actually, as Don Miguel used to talk about emotional poison. And he would say that some people just, they're carrying all of this emotional poison and negativity and all, and they're just looking for whoever they can dump it on. And then they walk away feeling better, and the other person is left there feeling horrible.
And they only feel better temporarily, because they have to do that with the next person and the next person.
Yeah.
And they often don't take personal responsibility for what they're dumping, for the content of what they're dumping, not just the act of dumping, but the content of what they're dumping. And it's usually about someone else. And emotional vulnerability would be that, my boss is a jerk, I have so much trouble with it. But at the same time, I haven't been truthful with him or her, or, I haven't done the best job I could. So that opens hearts, ideally. That may not be the best example, but when people take responsibility for what's going on in their lives, that is a heart opener.
Yeah. So, how do you stop doing, how does a woman who is very emotional, and, something that I think is so important to talk, to mention, is that a lot of women pride themselves on being in touch with their emotions, I mean, almost as if that's and it's good to know, to know your feelings, your emotions and all. But sometimes it's like you talked about in your work, when people were doing, when you were teaching, you noticed that some teachers would really get the students to go through these huge emotional releases and this unwinding. For anyone who doesn't know, you're a body worker and you've taught all over the world. And you notice that some other teachers, they really encourage these big emotional outbursts, as if these people, the students were having these huge healings because of this. But then you notice they would just go to the next session and do the same thing all over again.
Right. It's never really a release. In fact, it can drive issues deeper with this repetitive histrionic.
Yeah, well, they found that like with Primal Scream, they thought, okay, everybody's going to go scream and release and whatever. And all they found was that it just was a perpetual, a thing that just, it didn't get anywhere.
I think the thing to remember is that the gentleman sitting across from a woman isn't her therapist and isn't her girlfriend. He's a guy. And some things, particularly in the beginning, before you really establish what we call the guardian of your soul relationship, which is the goal of our work, to establish that special type of relationship. It's just too much. It's too much for a guy.
For any guy.
Yeah. And he doesn't know whether to offer suggestions or just to listen and be just this blank listening person.
Listening person. Well, I think one of the things that we so encourage the women to do in our program, especially in the very beginning, is we encourage them to have fun and be playful, not in a fake way, but we really encourage, and especially initially, to reach out with humor and playfulness and lightness of being. And it doesn't mean that there's not room for deep emotional connection, even in those first dates, but to keep it somewhat light and playful so that, a man can sort of come in.
Yes.
And, if you hit him with too much heaviness right out of the starting gate, and so many women can be very dour and they can just come in. I used to think that being, deep made me, an old soul, or made me somehow have gravitas, but really it just was heavy.
Yeah.
It was heavy, and men felt it, and it pushed them away, especially the kinds of men I really wanted to attract.
And sometimes when it's taken to extreme, that women can do it because of self-interest, but they could also do it because they're testing the man. Is this a guy who can handle my emotions?
Yeah, they do that.
And
we do that.
And usually they can't. not in the early stage.
Especially in the early
because
stages.
they extrapolate what this is going to look like 10 years from now. And being with this person, am I just going to be a listening board to all the problems and deep emotions and unresolved emotions? So often these first dates are, the man is thinking about, what is it going to be like to wake up with this woman, years and years from now? And if it's just going to be heavy, emotional, one-sided, he's looking for someone to have fun with and to share emotions, and for someone to be able to elicit emotion from him.
Well, I think it's really important for women to understand, like you said, if we're going to put this in, very concrete terms, just so women can understand, we're not trying to stigmatize anybody in any way. Women are women. We are emotional. we do go through hormonal shifts that men do not go through. And we have to have compassion for ourselves because, menopause and menstruation, menstrual cycles and all, this is something that men do not experience. And we have to be loving and compassionate and self-accepting because this is heavy stuff. And for some women, it's very extreme. And some women really, really, really suffer through these things. So I don't want any woman listening to what we're saying right now to feel bad, to feel stigmatized, to feel like we're making her wrong, because that is absolutely not what this conversation is about.
Yeah.
It is not about that. It's understanding that there are limits, that men are men. They do not have a frame of reference for this. They cannot understand what we're going through. And so the more self-aware a woman can be, you cannot say to a man, well, you need to understand, this is something that we as women, well, you need to understand and whatever. Yes, we invite you to understand and be more understanding and know that we don't have often control over our bodies and our moods and all. And sometimes we're emotional, we're crying, and we don't even know why. We feel sad, we feel torn into, and that can go for, and even for some women, 10 days, even no matter how long our cycles are, that can go for half a month for some women. They can be part of the month one way and part of the month another way. So it is important that men understand this is out of our control in a lot of ways, but having said that, it is something a woman has to also understand, that a man doesn't go through this. He doesn't. And he can't be your therapist. He is not your girlfriend. And so it is important to see a doctor, to get help if you can, to get on hormone replacement or to get on the pill or something to help regulate your cycles and your moods, if you can do that. Because if you're going to have a healthy, close, intimate relationship, that is something that a lot of women will not, especially in menopause. I mean, so many relationships get destroyed in menopause because a woman suddenly has no sex drive. She completely has these horrible moods. And so just like we want men, when they're struggling or they have ED or something, to see a physician, it's important for women to do that too and do whatever they can. But also, go ahead, babe. What were you going to say?
No, I was just listening. It was
Yeah.
Great. One thing I wanted to bring up as well is that it's absolutely normal for women and men to be anxious before a date.
Mm-hmm.
But there are those people that really have their attachment style is an anxious style.
Mm-hmm.
And when they go into a date with anxiety, anxiety and vulnerability don't coexist together. They often are at odds with each other. So for those women or men who feel anxiety, just take a few moments, what we would call the magic minute before a date. Would you explain the magic minute?
The magic minute is just, before you go into a date, it's to, in your car or whatever, but to sit, just put your hands on your heart, and really take a deep breath and connect with your heart and set a real intention for deep connection, for emotional availability and all for the date, so that when you do walk in and then go into the date, and when you come to the door, put your shoulders back, open up the area around your heart before you enter the restaurant or the
Mm.
coffee shop or the room, so that you're not, pulled in and constricted. But it's important, body language and body posture can often have a huge effect on our mood.
Yes.
So if you're on a date and you're feeling tense, one of the other things that we talk about is going from a closed fist to an open to an open heart. And what that means is, under the table, if you're feeling tense, you can make a fist, and then you just very slowly, you do not go like that, but you just, under the table, you very slowly just let your hand start to open. Maybe you can all try this right now. And you just let your hand, without intentionally, but just let it open. And as you do, feel your heart opening at the same time. And that's another way of releasing the stress, the emotional tension that you may be feeling on a date. So yeah, one Benjamin technique and one Lisa technique.
Right.
Guess which is which. But yeah, there's things that you can do, even just with your body posture and all, to release that tension and that emotional constriction that you may feel, may be feeling, because it's not just happening up here, it's happening in your body while you're on the date. So, honey, first, compassion, just for women and men to have compassion, both for themselves and for each other,
Yes.
understanding that we don't always have control. And for women to be forgiving of themselves, and compassionate with themselves, and not, part of our emotion comes from also blaming and judging ourselves for feeling the way we do. So tracking your cycles is very important as you're getting into your 40s and your early 50s, going and seeing a hormone doctor, because that can also just biologically, physically have a lot to do with uncontrollable emotion that you may be feeling and not know where it's coming from. But then there's just emotional messiness.
Right. And that's when we need to be able to track both our emotions and our words, and track the person sitting across from us. And if they're just sitting there kind of blank-eyed, being a listener, an unpaid listener, then to be willing to shift, to take a breath, and begin to change the mood of the conversation.
Or even just say, and what do you think?
Exactly. Invite sharing, invite mutual connection, mutual vulnerability.
What do you think about what I just said?
Yeah. Or has that ever happened to you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, find a way, because sometimes when we get, especially women, we get caught up in our stories. And then when we start telling a story, we start to get, we feel like we start reliving all the emotion.
Yes.
And all. That's a very common female thing. We will then start to go back into the emotion and the drama of the experience, and instead of just telling the facts. And that's another thing that as women we can do, is try to, if we are telling a story or something, there's my coach, Russ Ruffino, who's my business coach. Russ will often say, bring the data, not the drama. And that's a good rule of thumb with men, bring the data, not the drama. So if you can go to a man and say, hey, this happened, I want to tell you about what happened, without giving the drama and just the data, I think that's also another wonderful tool with men and women. We can take that from Russ and repurpose it for END. Oh, I think our women are here, so we're going to have to get going. But, think about, just pay attention, find a way. When you're on a date and you see a man sort of glazing over on the date and checking out and sort of looking like lost in a conversation, it may be a sign that you are being too emotional.
Yeah. And above all, we encourage emotional vulnerability because that is what creates connection.
Yeah.
Mutual connection. So we're not telling people not to be emotional, but to be emotionally vulnerable rather than just emotional.
Or as we like to say, emotionally naked.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, babe. Thanks for being here.
My
Thanks
pleasure.
for doing this. We're going to go to a wonderful spot called Ojo Caliente for anybody who's been to Santa Fe. Or if you haven't and you do come, you should go to Ojo. I've never been, so this is, maybe I was there once long, long ago, but I'm excited to go with you and the women. And I am Lisa Shield. This has been Getting Inside the Right Male Mind. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please tell everyone you know, your sisters and brothers, your mothers, your fathers, your nieces, nephews, girlfriends, guy friends, whoever you know, please spread the word about this broadcast. We really do try to give you real information. We do a course called Emotionally Naked Dating for anybody who would love to find a guardian of her soul. Please go to lisashield.com and click the button to watch my free 45-minute presentation. And at the end of that presentation, you are welcome to sign up for a free breakthrough call with me or a member of my team so we can show you how we can help you find a guy like this of your very own. He's not the only one out there. And also, you can like and rate my podcast. You can give us a thumbs up here as well. You can give us a heart. You can like my YouTube channel. You can also go to my website and you can sign up for our emails. And finally, you can send us your suggestions to podcast@lisashield.com. We take all of your suggestions seriously. And who knows, we may do a special broadcast on something you suggested. So again, we so appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. Look at how you're being emotional and start asking yourself, what's the difference? How does it feel in my body when I'm being emotional? And how does it feel when I'm being emotionally naked? Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.